yes, the film. To put context to the film. So obviously it's a film about workers who took over a factory and then converted it into a cooperative. So why are we showing this film? One reason is that cooperatives are a form of economic organizing that is in fact growing. Okay. Just a little bit of information to demonstrate that. In 2012, the United Nations, well, actually before that, they declared 2012 to be the year of cooperatives. And they commissioned a survey, global survey to be done about cooperatives, and it was done. And they found that roughly a third of the people on planet Earth were somehow associated with some kind of cooperative, okay? But the thing that is more important is that they found that 10 million people worked in a cooperative. Not that they were members of a credit union or they were part of a marketing co-op and something like that, but they actually worked in a business that was owned by the workers, okay? So what we would call a producer cooperative or a workers cooperative. 10 million people is a lot of people, and a lot of people wouldn't even dream that there are 10 million workers who are working businesses that they own. Okay, all right. Apart from that as a trend, there's some various other things that have happened that show the growing trend of co-ops. So let me begin with sort of one co-op, which is sort of the largest co-op in the world of this kind. It's called Mondragon. It's located in Spain, in northern Spain. It's actually a cluster of workers' cooperatives, about just under 100 workers' cooperatives. It has about 85,000 people in it. And they do a range of different things, from low-tech stuff like, well, maybe the farmers will not agree, but low-tech, stuff like farming, let's say, which sometimes is not so low-tech, but also high-tech stuff like making parts for jet engines, okay, right across the spectrum. And the annual turnover 5 years ago was 15 billion euro, okay? So it's not a small outfit, okay? A lot of people don't know that in the last years of the Soviet Union, okay, Mikhail Gorbachev in 1987 initiated a program of cooperatives. And from 1987 to 1990, about 190,000 cooperatives were formed with 5 million people in them. He did it in order to rescue the socialist system, but the socialist system was too far gone to be rescued. So when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1990, the cooperatives also disappeared, okay? In Cuba, in 2014, something similar happened. The Communist Party of Cuba decided to sell off some of the state enterprises to cooperatives, to workers to run as cooperatives. So that's something that happened. You've seen in Argentina, okay, in Venezuela, in Brazil, in Uruguay, there are tens of thousands of cooperatives, right? Similar to what you've seen. Okay, so this is a growing trend. So that's why we showed this film and we asked the question, can it happen in Africa? But what I would like is to reframe that question a little bit, because you either get a yes or a no answer, right? We have reason to believe that cooperatives are a good thing. And I'll just say two reasons why we think they're a good thing. One is that because people own the businesses they work in, it means that the wealth of the society is spread amongst everybody, okay? For some, that may be a bad thing, but for some, that is a good thing. Okay? So I and others are among the some that think that's a good thing. The other good thing, we think, is that because people own their businesses, they have agency. So they're not just taking commands. When you go to work, you're not just taking commands. You are part of the decision-making process. And again, for some people, that might be a bad thing, but for others, that is a good thing, okay? And the net result is that you have a lot of solidarity. So because we think that cooperatives are a good thing, this is why I want to now reframe the question slightly to put it this way. Instead of saying, can it happen in Africa? Yes or no? Let's imagine that let's say that it can. There's no reason why it shouldn't. I could have used examples from Asia, from China, yeah, and so on. So other people are doing it. We are not doing it so much. So the question I would like us to discuss today is how, if we so desire, could we make cooperatives where people own their own businesses exist and thrive in Africa? Okay. So this is not to pretend that there are no problems. We know there are problems, but the how is, how do we deal with the problems? Okay, we recognize the problem, how do we overcome it? How do we go to the left of it, to the right of it, under it, above it, through it, whatever, yes? We want to overcome the problems and see how we can make this happen. So that's the framework that I want to set for the discussion today, okay? So now I will stop talking and open it up and see what contributions are coming either online or from you in the audience. So is there, we're open. So I'm assuming that you kind of agree with the idea. If you don't, that's fine. You can say why you think you don't think we should happen and we shouldn't try. But if you do, please, let's have some suggestions. And we'll keep, we'll take record of what you're saying, because what we're trying to do at Cooperation Africa is precisely this, right? Is to try to create an environment in which we can encourage and support people who want to set up workers' cooperatives. Cooperatives generally, but especially workers' cooperatives. So that's, I think, having said I'm going to stop, I'm going to stop. Over to you. Yes.
Hello, everyone. I'm Namaka. I'm General. We are an Nkrumahist movement in Ghana. That means we're Pan-Africanists, we're socialists, we're pushing towards economic justice and democracy and all of that. So we are very much in line with the idea that cooperatives are a good and necessary thing. In fact, I'm here with our head of projects and programs, Regina Amaga, and we have been trying in our movement to build a cooperative to sort of very success, but it's been an issue. But I think one thing that really stood out to me, and I think it's something that sort of affirms what we've also been experiencing, is the importance of not isolating it from what is happening in terms of like the political framework, right? Recognizing that, I'll use the example of, there was a man that they asked in the factory, which factory was it Forja? No, it wasn't Forja, it was the other, was it Brooklyn? Anyway, there was one of them who actually turned out to be supporting Menem. Yes. Even as he was sitting within a space where he was benefiting from a system which actually supports and benefits the worker. And I think it's something that really sort of drew a parallel for me in terms of what we're experiencing in Ghana at the moment, where we are easily swung between sort of people who represent establishments in various ways and forms. And because we are not necessarily grounded ideologically or in any other way, it is easy then for a person who is representing an interest that is not for the majority to now step in and exploit that. And so when you look at the fact that, I mean, they were talking about, I think it was biscuits and Coke or something like that. Here it was Hausa Cocoa in the last election or something like that, So in recognition of that fact, as we're doing the building the cooperatives, and sorry, I'm now also going to boast small because our head of education is here as well. The ideological sort of side of things, I think, has to be paired with the work that we're doing so that people also understand the system that we're building, not just from a point of this is structural and benefits, but also looking at the long-term goals of it. And so people who are with very real needs are not swayed by campaign messages and things like that. Because you could look at that, the person who was working in that factory, he was benefiting and it was something that would work in the long term. But because this message appeared to represent his immediate need, he was being swayed by it, even while in a system that was working towards his benefit. So I think for me, it's about pairing it, to be very clear about pairing it with the sort of ideological clarity and the attempt to sort of ensure that everyone has access to the information that makes sure that the framework that is built is solid if every individual is part of the foundation.
Can I summarize that by saying it's about involving people in cooperatives, but also providing education about the significance of cooperatives and why their wider significance,
Yeah.
not just for the individual, but for society as a whole.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any other comments?
Sorry, we have hands online.
Just to say, for those online, if there are questions, please speak. Yeah, okay, so.
We have 2 hands. May I help with
How do
this,
we-
please?
George Poe, can you try to either speak, or if you don't have a mic, can you write your question in the
Hello,
chat, please?
Hello?
Or not
Can you
question,
hear us,
hopefully it's a
Adote?
comment about how we can grow such a movement
Yes,
in
please.
Africa.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
So while you're doing that, let me see if there are any.
Can you hear me, please?
Does that come up? I can't.
Ajite,
I can't.
I am trying to speak. Can you hear me, please?
Okay. Okay, please let me hear you.
This is George Paul Williams. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the question, can this happen in Africa? I overwhelmingly say yes. And I say yes because I come from Liberia, and before the civil war in Liberia, we have cooperatives, especially so in the farming sector. And the cooperatives were doing very well before the war, and the war came and dismantled them. And ever since the war had ceased, there had not been a political will to give these people access to market anymore as it used to be, because the war decimated all of our infrastructure, road network, and all of that. But I think what we can do, get this up. As the first speaker said, I 100% agree that there's a need for education. Of more than education, there is a need for political will. Because when corporate institutions are coming about, they take loans from banks, from governments, but when they come to the individuals, the common people, they do not have the same opportunity to have seeding funds. And this is where the problem lies. So when they can access funding to support their cooperatives, I can tell you with education and good legal framework, they can definitely pick up and do well in Africa. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, George.
Thank you very much.
Adote, we do have another hand. We do
Okay,
have
sorry.
another question from
Just a second. Yes, just
Yes,
give me a second.
okay.
Let me summarize, because not everybody may have heard clearly what was said in
Sure.
this room. So the point was that in Liberia, there were cooperatives some time back before the Civil War. And as a result of the Civil War, a lot of infrastructure of the cooperatives were destroyed. And so he's saying that he agrees with the first speaker that, yes, there needs to be education, but he's also saying that there needs to be political will. In other words, those who are in government need to create an environment in which cooperatives can thrive. So that's the point that was being made then. Yes, what is the next?
Okay, may I help you? We also have a hand from Turuhi. Turuhi, may I ask you to speak?
Yes, hello, thank you. First of all, I just want to say well done, Adote and the team in Accra for organizing this screening. I think it was a brilliant documentary, which once again shows the power of documentary in showing us how we all can learn from each other across, continents. I guess I just wanted to follow up on what the other two speakers have said, because it all is about mobilization. The thing that was very strong in the South American thing is that it came out of an adverse situation, a very, very dire situation. So it was a tipping balance that created that the perfect storm in a way for such a thing to happen. How do you mobilize people? Because yes, you need education, you need to empower them. How do you mobilize? Who does it take to mobilize them? The workers quite often are so downtrodden within their work environment, earning the money for bread. I guess I want to know is that how strong is the trade union movement in African countries? I mean, I'm sure it'll vary depending on which country it is, whether it was a former socialist country or not. But I would like to know, whether there is a strong trade union movement that can do the politicization and the education to mobilize people, to know that they can have ownership, that they can have agency. And also, I wanted to have an update on that factory that was featured. How successful were they in continuing as a cooperative? And, did it work as a business model? Does it still continue as a cooperative? Thank you.
I'll answer the last question first. Yes, it does continue, and there are about, I think it would be true to say, roughly 300 such cooperatives that became cooperatives at around 2004, and have continued to be functioning as successful cooperatives. So they haven't collapsed, they're still in existence. And then, I mean, the point, well, you were asking a question about whether trade unions are strong, and whether I think you're thinking that they should be part of the process of helping to get cooperatives to move forward. I agree, but one, trade unions in Africa sometimes are not that strong, but two, sometimes history has shown us examples where trade unions can sometimes be a hindrance to cooperative formation. So that is something that we also have to be aware of and take into account. It's not always given that trade unions will automatically support workers' cooperatives. So cute, strange as that may seem. Okay, there's a question from here, this end. Just a second, those of you who are online, there's a question from here.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed this screening. And I agree with most of what has been said, especially by my comrade. When you said you're going to rephrase the question, I thought you were going to rephrase the question more in the direction of the fact that cooperatives do already exist here. So I thought you were going to be saying something along the lines of how to make them more impactful. We are aware of, especially in the north, in the artisans around weaving, shea butter, very powerful women's cooperatives, and everywhere that there's farmers, even towards the south, there are what you could call cooperatives. Sometimes it doesn't go much beyond sort of negotiating pools to say that we put all our things together, which doesn't really count as a cooperative all the way, but it's somewhere around there. If we're talking specifically about cooperatives like what we saw in the documentary, that's a bit more interesting, because I was here thinking, what does happen when a factory goes out of business and people are fired here? I'm not sure if what happens with the parts, that's basically what happened in this documentary. We do know that definitely our police would not extend the same kinds of, I'm not going to use the word humanity that Argentina did, but definitely forbearance where they held off violence. We know our police are very much more the foot soldiers that capitalists want them to be, and are quicker to be manipulated against their own class, who should be their own class allies. So along those lines, I'm not sure details wise, but we have cooperatives here. So my question would be more, how do we make them more efficient? How do we make them more politically impactful? And definitely what my sister said about how do we, who are maybe not engaged with them, work with them to get them more educationally, ideologically aware of their positioning, their power, and so forth.
Okay, but thank you very much for that. Just bit of information. The reason why that was able to happen in Argentina is because in the Argentinian constitution, It is provided that if the owners of a business leave the business and they owe the workers wages, then the workers have a legal right to ask the courts for that factory or business to be assigned to the worker. Without that legal provision, it's not happening. That taps into what was said earlier about political will. In how many countries does such a provision exist in their laws? Okay, so that's yeah, that's the background to that.
Can you hear me?
Somebody online? Okay. Is that Wayne? I can see that he's got a hand up.
Yeah.
Hold
Okay.
on.
Hi. Good afternoon. Okay.
Go ahead.
Great. Good evening to everyone. I'm in London, but I have a lot of knowledge of cooperatives from in Trinidad. Now, cooperatives, Africans in the diaspora have organized cooperative. There's even one that is over a century old. Are you hearing me? Yeah, are you hearing me?
Yes, you can hear you.
Right. And so, for example, in Trinidad, we had what was called the Penny Bank. It was a cooperative started by farmers, African farmers, some of them on so-called colored farmers, who could not get loan from Barclays because Barclays had put up a barrier to entry at a certain amount of money in order to start an account. And they got together, cane farmers, people who farm in various things, and they decided that the amount you needed to start an account was a penny in those days, in the 19th century, and it became known as the penny bank. This has grown over the years and now is one of the national banks in Trinidad. We also have, within the trade union movement, a lot of credit unions. Right, so you'll find that a lot of trade unions have their own credit unions. The sad thing is that the cooperatives in Trinidad, in the form of credit union, are mainly involved in lending money for consumerism. Right, so that people will go there, even to the extent that they can go to your credit union and borrow money to buy a costume for carnival. Right, so it's how do you get those systems to work for the people involved in it to go into enterprises, agricultural cooperatives. I mean, one of the older cooperatives is actually a taxi driver who form a cooperative in Trinidad. So that's where we need, is how you can get to the situation where you make the cooperative work as a parallel institution within the economy. There are ways in which you can get gestation of that going through, like employees share ownership in various enterprises. You trying to get that legislated into laws. And the other thing I need to remind people is the informal cooperatives we brought with us to the other parts of the world, like Susu, as we call it in Trinidad, which I think come from Isu. They call it box in Jamaica. They call it lend hand in the Eastern Caribbean, and so on. So there are forms of cooperatives, informal and formal, that already exist within the diaspora. And it's how you can get to harness the good practices from those cooperatives and learn about the various obstacles, which might be legislative, for example. I think there are some restrictions placed on credit unions involving themselves in the formal economy, right, as enterprises. So, and if you get cooperatives to work with each other, so that an agricultural cooperative could work with a manufacturing and a construction cooperatives and so on, you will find that there will be a sort of a acceleration in the organic growth of these cooperatives. But it may mean taking different forms of trading. So some of it might have to be bartering, right? In terms of assist that growth that does not necessarily involve monetary exchange of monetary units. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anybody else online who wants to say something? No, I don't see.
We have some comments posted in the chat. Can you see the chat? They don't want to come online, but they're
Hold
in
on,
the
let me
chat.
see if I can open the chat.
Yeah, thanks.
Is that the chat? Okay. Open the chat. Yeah. Okay. Okay, there's a question about whether labor unions, says, I'm wondering whether labor unions in the Argentinian case were the key actors, or is it a broader social community movement, including other workers' labor organizations beyond traditional trade unions? Okay, so I mean, yes, the second option is more correct, that it was a broader social and community movement, including other workers and labor organizations, not just the trade unions. Let me just say a little bit about the credit unions that Wayne mentioned, that it's true that people, well, one is that the rules governing credit unions globally and practiced by most credit unions is that they should have members who are individuals, and those members should only borrow for consumption. Those are the rules. Some countries bend those rules. The one most notable that does that is Kenya. So in Kenya, their members are individuals, but they borrow for business. But they don't announce that they're borrowing for business. The individuals borrow and they use it for business. And people kind of accept that. They don't like to have actual businesses to join credit unions, so that's a problem. Yeah, but as an individual, you can join a credit union and borrow and use the money for business if you're in Kenya. In the Caribbean, it's not so common. And indeed, in other parts of Africa, it's not so common. But what that has meant is that the Kenyan credit union system has grown and become the most powerful of the continent, right? Because they quickly turn over and increase the capital of the credit union, because they're lending to people and they don't have to go and earn money from somewhere else to come and pay the loan. They use the loan to generate the money to pay the loan. And so that's what makes it. And therefore, if we were to, let's say in Ghana, we have about 500 credit unions listed, yeah, on the books. If those credit unions, some of them are quite big, if those credit unions were to decide, they might get some pushback from the global body. This is now where Africans have to decide, how we fight, yeah? So if they were to decide that we're going to follow the Kenyan example, then they have a fair bit of money stored up, which they could use to support people to run businesses. What would be really novel would be if the credit unions would provide loans to people who are starting cooperatives, because the credit union is a cooperative. Yes? So if that was to happen, if we could get people to begin to think about that, that would be a big change. But Anyway, yeah. Any other? Yes.
So mine is a question about how the workers were able to run the factory. First and foremost, the film showed us that some of the equipment were stolen, raw materials were sold off. How did they mobilize to do the initial investments in the factory? Did they have to put together the funds they had to get raw material? Because you need some level of investment before the factory, a dead factory actually runs. How were they able to do that? That's my first question. The second one has to do with looking at the fact that we do not have that legal framework currently in Ghana. Can we use the existing framework in order to achieve these goals? Because I think it is the principle that counts. The principle of shared property and the principle of having everybody partake in the business. We currently have a lot of limited liability or privately owned businesses. Some have started the employee shareholder scheme, where you join a company after some years, they're given a share in the business. So it encourages loyalty and all. How can we, or how can the Corporation Africa intervene and have those discussions with workers' union so that they can improve that state? Because I think gradually, when we see that model working, it will give us the political drive or political will to get the legislation in place to see that, yes, that is an option that can work. So these are my two questions.
Okay. Is there anybody else have nothing else is on the chat? Okay. So you saw part of in the film, they had gone to a factory to see if they would take their output. Remember, you saw that? Okay. So that is what allowed them, because now it's like that's money in the bank. Yes, I have somebody who's ready to take my output. So on the back of that, you can raise money. On the back of that, they did raise money to get the thing functioning. But they had to start at a much lower level than the factory was when it originally closed down. Because yes, a lot of the equipment had been taken away. But that ability to negotiate and get a contract, you know, was what allowed them to begin to pull themselves up, as it were, by their bootstraps. Okay. Okay. Then yes, so what was the second point about?
Employee shareholder scheme, where employees.
Oh yes, the shareholder scheme. Okay, first of all, employee share ownership isn't really a co-op because it gives them shares, it gives workers shares, but it doesn't give them any voice, doesn't give them any power. Okay, that's the way it's been designed. So it's good, it's better than nothing, but it's not, you know, it doesn't take you a long way forward. But also, even so, it is up to the shareholders to decide that they want to operate an employee share ownership scheme, or it may be the government that might nudge companies and say, we think this is a good idea, this is something you should do. So again, we come back to the issue of the political will. What framework are our governments putting in place, all right, to encourage cooperatives? I mean, just a Ghanaian example is we have a way to go. In Ghana, it is not that it's forbidden, but the Companies Act does not provide for cooperatives. So technically, you cannot have a business that is a workers' cooperative in Ghana, right? The law doesn't provide for it. It doesn't say you can't have it, it just doesn't allow you to have it. Yeah. So we would then need to get involved in discussions, right? Not so much with the owners of the businesses, but with the government to say, why don't you produce a cooperative act that one defines businesses that are cooperatives, how they should operate, yeah? And then at least there's a space. And that's very important. Yeah, okay. I can see Dede's hand up. Dede, did you have a question?
To unmute. Okay. Hello, can you hear me now?
Very well.
Yeah. Good. I put a question on the chat. I'm wondering if it's still visible because I got logged out and when I came back in, I can't see any of the questions now. Is my question still there?
I think you should just ask it, just ask it. I think that would be
Well, I want
quicker.
to speak to it rather than ask it again because I'm not sure I can repeat it.
I don't know whether we can find it
But
though.
it was a question
Yes, so
about,
I'll repost the chat.
Thank
It is there still.
Okay.
it was about knowing more about the judge's decision, how the judges or the judge came to that decision to allow the workers to expropriate the factory. And I wanted to, the context for this is, do you remember, Adote, the old debates we used to have when we were young students and young intellectuals about the objective conditions and the subjective conditions? It seems from watching that film, that documentary, that situation in Argentina was a revolutionary moment, as has been mentioned earlier. Something was building up, it was a political context and so forth. In another context, perhaps the judges wouldn't have given such a judgment. It would be interesting to know what arguments they used in giving that judgment, but also to point out that what we're talking about in Cooperation Africa is about setting up cooperatives, whereas this documentary is about expropriating a cooperative, which may be difficult in the context of Ghana or Africa. Given that difference, it's very inspiring, I think, very interesting and very inspiring because it shows what can be done when you have the will and the political will. However, we do also need to put it in a context of what if we don't have factories to expropriate? How do we get that finance to actually set up factories? And I think this was, you already started that. You already started it going down that line a few contributions ago, Adote. But from the documentary, it seemed, did it take them 6 months before they actually got the factory running again? And I wonder if that wasn't also, speaking to a question that has already been addressed, also because of the cost and the difficulty in organizing all the inputs, getting everything ready for startup. In fact, in spite of the fact that they had the machinery there, that they were awarded the machinery, it still took 6 months to start up. So how much more if we were actually starting from scratch?
Yeah, okay. I cannot, the question about the judge's legal argument, I'm not able to answer that question, Dede. Sorry. I just don't have that information.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
But I think they made it semi-clear in the documentary itself. It was about the fact that he was selling the property within the factory without their knowledge.
Right, yeah.
So in good faith, everything should stay as is,
it was.
and in bankruptcy should then pay off the employees. But he's secretly selling off the raw materials and some other things that went missing.
Yeah.
So it's a revolutionary moment in the fact that at any other time, the judge might still have gone in his direction, but because of the scrutiny of the moment and yes, the theft that took place, then that put it in the favor of, that's in the case of Forja. Sure. I'm not sure about
the other ones, yeah.
Interesting, yeah.
So, I mean, I think the idea about a revolutionary moment is pertinent.
Yeah.
And but what I would argue is that if it's a revolutionary moment, then it may be easier to expropriate. If it's not a revolutionary moment, then you might have to start creating from scratch. You're not expropriating anybody, provided there's a legal framework that even allows you to start from scratch. So that I think that's very important. So in other words, one is saying that you can have movement that is slow or quick, depending on the objective conditions, but that you can have movement. Yeah, and depending on the conditions, it can be quicker or not so quick. I was going to. So yeah, that would be what I would say. I don't want to say anything more than that. Any other comments from? Yes.
Hello, I'm so not in this world in that development, but I do have a question. Is close. I'm just speaking quietly. Okay, I do have a question. It's about the fact that there's a lot of informal economies or the ways in which people make money in Africa, and how I think this is a really important part of how people make money and how people, but you know, is there a cooperative possibility for people who make money informally? Oh, do you want me to say who I am?
No, I understand. No, I'm just trying to.
You do want to say, okay, I'm.
No, please.
Oh, no, someone else asked for me to
Oh.
say, so I'm going to say.
Okay.
Okay, my name is Barbie Asante and I'm an artist, but I'm a resident at the library.
Okay, cross purpose. Sorry. I thought you were going to repeat your question. And yeah. No, it's okay. It's all right. So the question was that, or the statement was that there are, or it's a question that there are many people who earn a living in the so-called informal economy, and whether there is an opportunity for them to form cooperatives. That's the question? Yes. Okay. I think there is, but I think that leads the answer. We're talking about how to overcome problems, yeah. And I think that there is a problem in there somewhere, which is this, that many people would like to have their own business, even if they're operating at an informal level. And not only do they like to have their own business, but I dare say that there are many people who, how do I put this? May think twice if they have to get into a situation that relies on them trusting somebody else or some other people. Yeah. And I think that that's also an issue. So I think that absolutely yes, my answer to your question will be that yes, people will earn informally. But the question is whether they are ready to, what would it take to get them to take those steps? And maybe that comes to some of the points that were made at the very beginning. But I would add an additional point, which is this, that, and this feeds into some of the stuff that Cooperation Africa we have as part of our strategy, that if we have money, that if we can help people with finance, and put it that way, yes, if we can help people with finance, then that would help people to overcome, let's put it that way. The fact that they can get, that there's finance available, if they operate in a particular way, yes, in a cooperative manner, that may help them to overcome some of the things that would normally stop them from engaging in that kind of activity. I'm putting it very deliberately in a very woolly sort of way, yeah? But yes, that's so I think that if you have, there's some experience in the world, yeah, in other places, especially in Bangladesh, let me say, that shows the power of if you put money in front of people and you provide technical support, then people will be willing to begin to think twice about how they do things, because life is hard. Life is hard. Yeah?
Adote, can you hear me?
Sorry, no, you have to give her please give her the.
Hold on, look at
Turn it on and eat.
But then, does that mean that those economies are something that we know not? I mean, because they're very important, to Africa. I remember last time I came here, I went to a talk about chotros and the whole chotro system and how important this system is to local people. And even though the government puts in a bus system, that doesn't wash, because the chotro system is so old, so important. And I'm thinking about that bottom up, those systems that people want and need. And if there is, I mean, maybe it's less cooperative, maybe it's about also thinking about organizing within those frameworks
that might eventually bring out something. I mean, I think that's what you're saying, but I'm thinking also that is there something in there that sort of eventually we lose those systems, or are we going to support them? I mean, those informal systems.
Adotei, can you hear me?
Yeah, so my background is architecture, so this is something that always gets me going. Can you hear me? Yeah, much better, okay. And the thing about what we call the informal is simply by virtue of the fact that people have been marginalized, and they are marginalized because there is this desire to emulate imported urban, right? So basically they are marginalized because they don't fit imported models of urbanity, right? Now, that said, those spaces that we call informal are actually super organized already. And there's a lot of potential within those spaces already to sort of plug in, I believe, in what's happening. And I can give a really sort of very basic example that may not be related to cooperatives, but it showed me how quickly there can be turnaround within spaces like that. Anyone who's been through Makola, especially the women, know what it used to be like when people used to grab you when you were walking through, like the vendors and things like that. And I noted, I didn't go for a while, and then I went back and I was on that place outside Rawlings Park. And it was like they had a script. They had all stopped touching people, and they were all saying, would you like to see my jeans? I also have a shop. Like, it was the same script across the board for about a block. And for me, that showed that it is very possible to organize people very quickly. So I think even though people have their sort of individual sort of businesses and all that, there is still that collective network that can be tapped into.
Hello, Adotei. So we have, hello, Adotei. We have a hand that is raised from Wayne, and we have a comment. Wayne, please, can you come on?
Adotei had mentioned the number of credit unions in Ghana, for example. If the experience of the credit unions in Ghana is the same as in Trinidad and Tobago, as a matter of fact in the Caribbean, you'll probably find that they have what we call excess liquidity. All right, a lot of money there, and what I'm wondering is whether or not we should be spending our energy in trying to unlock the potential of this excess liquidity, because a lot of these credit unions put money into commercial bank and fixed deposits and get a trifling amount of interest. And these fixed monies are then lent to individual entrepreneurs who make a lot of money off of it. And they get a bit of a pittance from the banks. And if these credit unions if the laws that govern their activity, we were to get them changed so that it allows the credit unions to lend to companies or startup companies who could go into oil exploration, road construction, retirement resorts, construction of retirement resorts, with, and things like that, to generate the kind of income and profit that will feed back into the cooperative sector. You'll find that you'll get a spread of a diversity in the activities of the cooperative sector and accelerated growth. Because people are looking at the film, and the film gives you just one example, but that's an extreme economic crisis almost where capitalism is collapsing, right? And it's by action taken by workers. So if you're looking, you can't wait for that to happen in each country, but you got to start where you are and see how you can produce a program to unlock the potential that is being stifled because they don't want any alternative examples of other economic forms of economic organizations.
Thank you, Wayne. Off of that, just I think a couple of points to make. Yes, a lot of the credit unions in the Caribbean and indeed in Africa have excess liquidity, meaning that they have money that they can lend, but there's nobody to borrow. Yeah. In fact, the World Council for Credit Unions recommends that credit unions should try to lend at least 70% of the reserves they have to their members. In the last figures that I've seen, there's a combined figures actually for both, for Africa and the Caribbean, the level of lending is around 60%, okay? The interesting fact is that the two regions combined, if you take all the money in their credit unions, it's $30 billion. So if 40% is not doing anything, right? That's $12 billion that is available. How much did Ghana government borrow from the IMF? So there is money, but if we are not thinking proactively about how we can tap into that money, yeah. Now, of course, there's in one sense, what I'm saying is ridiculous because all that money is held by so many different credit unions, yeah? So it's not one person and they can give you that money. But the fact is that if you are only lending for consumption, then, you know, there's a limit to how much you can lend, okay? That's number one. And so that is a problem that needs to be addressed. But also that takes us into another area, which is that because credit unions are cooperatives and cooperatives are supposed to work together, there is actually nothing except the members of the credit unions themselves, nothing stopping credit unions pooling their resources, yes, in particular countries, let's say, for a start, not the whole of Africa and then the whole of the Caribbean, no. Just in particular countries, there's nothing to stop them from pooling their resources in particular countries to finance major development projects if they can tell the World Council for Credit Unions, basically, we're not obeying your rules anymore. We're creating our own rules because we need them. Yeah. But again, our governments are not comfortable doing that. But that's the kind of stuff we need to begin to do. So they're very technical, but they have great potential. Yeah. They have great potential. If we just get down into the detail, we can see that this change will make a big difference. And that's important. So Wayne, yes, I fully agree with what you're saying. And so if we can get people to lend for business, then this limit of this liquidity issue, I think, will go away. But also if we can get people to cooperate with one another, then the amount that is available for big projects would also increase. And we could finance much bigger projects than we are able to finance at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask Godfrey Martin.
Okay, there's somebody. Yeah, then you yes, just a second. Godfrey,
Hello.
Godfrey, you have something to say?
Yeah, I came in late on the discussions, but the experience in the Caribbean has been interesting. The cooperatives haven't really been making the kind of impact that they should have been making. A colleague of mine, we were trying to work on building cooperatives in agriculture on a project for cocoa. And we wanted to try and see if we can do it and he is really the main driver. I was just providing support Caribbean-wide. And the idea was the whole way in which the cocoa sector is organized meant that the farmers in cocoa were not really, were getting, chicken feed, and so cost of productions were low. So the intention was to try and see if we could set up a cooperative and change the whole way in which things are done. And it has been a challenge because people have not been experienced with that kind of approach yet. In other words, you have a production sector. Production has been organized through the experience of colonialism in a certain way. The intention was not for us to make money, was for us to work, etc. And the money is made abroad. So I think that's one of the whole big issues, even in agriculture, even in Africa, in the way in which production is organized and who is making, where is the value chain? So cooperatives have to treat with that. And then the other aspect that cooperatives have to treat with is the whole question of technology, the use of, even in production, because we are moving into a world with AI and the fourth industrial revolution. So all of these things have to be taken into account. I agree that we can't approach it from the point of view, because the international institutions want the cooperatives to kind of come under the central bank and to kind of treat cooperatives, credit unions like banks. We have to have better regulations, yes, but I agree that the cooperatives, the bulk of money that there is, they should be involved in production. But that would probably require a different kind of leadership and a different kind of people involved in it. So I think, because you are right, there is money available that can be invested in productive activities. I remember talking in Trinidad on a consulting position with one of the trade unions that had they had a big credit union. And the problem in agriculture, we were telling them, well, you need to look at seeing where you can invest some of your money, where you can help members and you can help members of the wider community. And it may be investing in some agricultural farms, etc. So I think, the leadership in the credit union and cooperatives have to think differently, because we are moving into an area that, with all the technology and things that's going on, that, we have to be clear on where we're going. So that's all I would say at this point.
Thank you very much, Godfrey. There was somebody in the audience here who wants to.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm Tofik Bida, manager of TNG. We are trying to form a cooperative. And I think what has been established is that there's a need for cooperative in Ghana and Africa. At the center of cooperative is the welfare of the members and the people. And so looking at the state of Ghana and Africa in general, it means that there is a need. And when you look at if there is a need, why isn't it happening? Because we can enumerate so many challenges. There's no capital, there's lack of government interest, and the people and all that. So why isn't it happening? For me, I think advocacy, there's no movement to integrate all the stakeholders involved. If you look at our poultry industry, for instance, the same people who do the farming are the same people who buy the poultry to eat, and are same workers who work to make the feed as well. So for instance, if you have, say 10,000 Ghana cedis, and you use that to farm maize, the feed producer wouldn't need 10,000 cedis. And the chicken producer wouldn't also need 10,000 cedis as capital. The maize, 10,000 cedis can produce it forward to the feed producer at credit for that person to also forward to the poultry to be done with the same at credit, and it to be sold to the members to it. Then the cycle continues. But in this state, what is happening is that you need 30,000. The chicken producer has to have 10,000. The sorry for the loss. The what's the name? The feed producer has to have 10,000, and the farmers have to also have 10,000. So at the end of the day, we realized that with the cooperative, we could have used, whatever support we have to support the farmers to produce, then the value chain improves along the line. Currently, the government of Ghana is selling off some factories, over 15 of them, and one of them is the meat factory in Forja. The cattle in Ghana, most of it comes from the north, is being rented. So why can't the factory work? We eat meat across there. So you realize that there is a need for it. The only reason, perhaps from our end, that we see is that there is no framework or enough advocacy to integrate, to educate. For instance, a politician, they might not be interested in it and say, but they are, because ECG, they are trying to sell to private. They are selling off our utility agencies to private entities to handle, with the expectations that the private entities will be efficient and all that. By the end of the day, it's the people, again, that have to ensure the efficiency. So why don't we allow the people to own the utility services to, no one will have to tell them to do the right things to ensure that it works. So that is a need for a cooperative framework to even manage our utilities. So I think that is where, for conversations like this one is very important. It's a start point. And it should continue. We need to be able to form the right advocacy to connect, to integrate all the interests, and let people know that this is something that can solve our problems. Thank you.
I really like what you're saying, and I've been really pleased by the discussion so far. People are making really grounded, serious points. And I think it's a good point at which to pick you up and say, look, the whole purpose of Cooperation Africa is actually to build a cooperative movement, including education, training, and advocacy work. Because clearly we've established here today that we need policy changes, we need advocacy, we need legal frameworks, and we need a lending environment that can mobilize resources so people can invest in co-ops. Maybe we need to train some of the existing financial institutions so that they will lend to co-ops, because conventional banks don't. But we're hearing a lot of ideas, and that's exactly what we hope for this event today. And it's part of an ongoing program. So I'd like to invite all of you, if you haven't subscribed already, the first thing is to join this movement. It's a small contribution that guarantees us independence by putting our own money where our mouth is. For membership, join and then be on the subscriber list and participate in the ongoing programs and activities and further conversations like this. Right now we're running monthly webinars, and this is the education. We have ideas and view to setting up financial institutions in the various countries where we have members. We have members distributed across quite a lot of African countries already. Who are in at the ground floor. So I'd say get in at the ground floor and join us. Go online, check out the website, and contribute to this ongoing conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, finally I can ask a question. Okay, so I don't know whether there's this program that I want to find out how it fits into the whole discussion around cooperatives. So it's often run by these NGOs like Ghana, World Vision. It's called a Village Savings Scheme. Village, I think VSL8. Basically, they have them all over the country. So what they do is that compared to the traditional banks, they ask people to save money. Instead of giving it to a susu collector, they give them a box, they put the money in there, they make rules around how they loan out the money and all that stuff. So it's like every week you're supposed to put an amount of money in the pot. And then for every month, they loan the money to a particular person, or depending on what rules they set, they add a little bit of interest to it. And I've done some work in that area before, because when I finished my undergraduate program in economics, it's actually the first job I did was to analyze some of these groups in a particular district. So I will collect the data and see what's happening. But I learned that, I mean, along the line, you realize that a lot of the groups were losing steam. Like, I mean, people were no longer interested in such things. But I think it fits into the idea of cooperative, because what would keep people wanting to be part of a cooperative? And I don't know whether it's the same variables that is driving what's happening in that setup, in that area. But yeah, so I don't know whether you're familiar with the literature around those village saving schemes, if you can talk a little bit about it. And also, what is the state of cooperatives in Ghana? I mean, generally, if you can give a very brief, because in my area, when I was growing up, I used to see a lot of cooperatives around. But now I can only think of one which was owned by a company in the area. So it's like their staff members who've created a cooperative by themselves. And yeah, so I don't know what's happening in the cooperative. And third, it's not a question, but just a comment. I know that the idea of, you mentioned Bangladesh quite often, because of Bangladesh is quite a place that some of these innovations have been happening. And you have the issue of the Grameen Bank and microfinance. I know it blew up here in Africa, specifically in Ghana, but then it also went down. So I don't know what's happening with that.
Okay. So many questions. Let me just say that I want to shut anything down, but maybe in about after say 2 or 3 questions, we should bring this to a close, yeah, and talk perhaps informally, because we have people online as well as here. So I mean, you've asked a lot of questions. Let me just very briefly, as much as I can, if I can remember them all. So let's start with the Grameen Bank. Mohammed Yunus, the person who started it, was not trying to build cooperatives, but he used some of the positive aspects of group lending to make his Grameen Bank successful. So he didn't lend to groups, but he lent to people who were part of a group. So if you wanted to borrow money from him, he'd say, go and bring 5 friends. Yeah. And then he would say to the 5 friends, you are the 5 friends, you want to borrow money, I'll lend you money. The rest of you, I will not lend you money unless he pays me back. And so there was pressure now on you to pay back. Yeah. And that's what kept his thing going. So the non-performing loans of the Grameen Bank was down about 2% because of this. In the regular banks in Bangladesh, non-performing loans was 46%. You know, so he wasn't losing his money, but he used that principle. But he was not trying to build cooperatives as a system. You know, so and the other microfinance people who came along are operating on the same principle. Yeah, so that's that. Okay. The Susu, in the literature we call it rotational lending. Yeah, because you change the person each time. And I mean, this is a very powerful method. And a lot of people use it. You know, the market women, who was talking about market women and Makola. Yes, I mean, you go there, you find almost certainly they're using it. Yeah, you know. Okay. And that's very, you know, it's very strong and very good. It allows people to do things they otherwise wouldn't be able to do. On the other hand, it has some limitations because it's like you're always building the ground floor. You know, you can't build above that. It's much harder to build above that with Susu, you know. But it's so common and it's used, you know, all over the place. It's being used as you know, and it helps a lot. You know, it makes lots of things happen. You know, if you have a group of, and there are many, if you have a group, 20 people, and you're putting in significant amounts of money. I know people from East Africa who are buying property. East Africa living in Europe, you know, and who are buying property in East Africa, you know, based on Susu, you know. Okay, so it's something that we should. In fact, there's those academics who are in the field are arguing that the Western academics have identified cooperatives in such a way that it does not include Susu. And they're saying that, but why not? We should include Susu as, part of that cooperative mix, And actually, if you think about it, there's no reason why it shouldn't be included. You just have to tweak the definition of a cooperative a little bit and it will work. So yeah, so that's important. In terms of cooperatives in Ghana, of course, I think most of you will know that, the history of cooperatives in Ghana, according to the law, it started in northern Ghana in 1958, apparently, through some, if you read when we read the books that they write for us, that's what they tell us, that some priests in northern Ghana started this cooperative movement. But many of them are credit unions. Many of them are agricultural marketing unions. And the history of Ghana, cooperatives took off with Kwame Nkrumah, who instituted a lot of cooperative engagement. But as with other parts of Africa, they were kind of top-down, and mostly top-down cooperatives are not as successful as bottom-up cooperatives, for a whole host of reasons, which we don't need to detain ourselves with at the moment. But I think it's kind of obvious why it might be the case, yeah. So that's, and once Nkrumah was overthrown, there was even a cooperative bank, in his time, which is no longer, doesn't exist anymore. The whole cooperative movement and the financing on cooperatives declined. Okay. So today there are not that many cooperatives other than the marketing co-ops and the credit unions. That's what's left. There may be a workers' cooperative in Ghana, but I'm not aware of it. But it may well be there. But it's not. They're not that many. And they're not that big. I think that's safe to say. I'm not going to say they are none. They may well be there. Okay. But having said that, I think the strongest, biggest, and in a sense interesting cooperative in the country is Kwapa Cocoa. Yeah. So they also had the same problem that when they were formed, there was no proper legal framework for cooperatives, just as now. But they found a way to begin operating. Their history is that the state used to buy the cocoa directly from the farmers. And then the state decided that it wasn't going to do that anymore. It was going to hand it over to the private sector. So the farmers' representative on the cocoa board, yes, was somebody who then said, this is an opportunity for the farmers and he created a cooperative for the farmers. That's why Kwapa Cocoa came into being. So the person sitting in the room, in the boardroom at cocoa board, took this thing and ran with it. And the farmers could see clearly that there's an advantage for them in creating this organization. And so that's how it came into being. Two things about them that are of interest. One is that they have now started, I think in Takoradi, a processing plant for cocoa with a view to making chocolate, their chocolate. Okay. The other interesting thing about them is that the Kwapa Cocoa as an organization, in conjunction with Fair Trade and with a British company, set up a company in England where they own a share of that business. And they're making a chocolate called Divine Chocolate. Okay? So you may have seen Divine Chocolate in Ghana. I don't know, you may have seen it outside, but that's the origin of Divine Chocolate. Okay. So, and they own this farmers cooperative in Ghana owns, I think it's just under 30% of the business in the UK. So, things are possible if you just allow your brain to, be imaginative. Yeah. So, so I think those are the points that I would touch on in terms of what you've said. As I said, I think we will need to begin to close, but if there's anybody with a question, please. No, you need the mic.
Thank you. So it's more of a contribution. I work with World Vision and Vision Fund. So the whole VSLA project is something that we actually spearhead a lot. The ladies or the women that we work with, when they do this VSLA for some time, we notice their track record is good in terms of repayment and lending. Then we have Vision Fund Ghana, which is a subsidiary that's into microfinance, come to them and give them higher loans. So gradually you realize that they are scaling up. And it's something that most microfinance companies are now looking into. So the VSLA and SUSU groups by these women are actually well organized, and they are getting more and better loan. They are using their bargaining power, and then their group guarantee. The group guarantee method, as you rightly said, that was established in Bangladesh. It allows these women to have liability, some group liability. So even though for microfinance companies, we can say, okay, this group, we are giving you 20,000, and the 20,000, you are splitting it among maybe your 5 members. If one person doesn't pay, you are all still liable for it. So you all get your money, and then you have a savings, something we call a security deposit. So your security deposit is also something we will keep. When you are unable to pay, we will take that and then still chase all of you to pay the money. So everybody is committed to repaying, number one, and to follow up to make sure that their neighbor also pays. We did a little study and we realized that it all boils down to how we are as Africans, because the same model was promoted in our Latin America branches, and it wasn't as effective as it is in Africa. So in Latin America, most of the Vision Fund groups actually collapsed, but then it was very successful in Ghana. So you are right, we have to tap into the VSLA and the SUSU groups. And then the microfinance groups also have to work with them. The reason why we at World Vision and Vision Fund can do that is because the NGO part of World Vision is of Vision Fund, which is World Vision, is able to absorb a lot of costs. These women are not mostly found even in Accra. Those with the very disciplined system are found in the hinterlands and in the villages where there's no banking. And it takes a lot to go to these women or to have these women meet you. There are instances where we have to take 2-3 canoes and travel about 50 kilometers with motorbikes to just access this women. So their desire is there to build a cooperative in their own way, but then they need some level of investment. Somebody should be willing to go the extra mile of meeting them, of working with them, and then scaling them up. So that's where it is not just government anymore. NGOs also have to step in and see how best they can also play that role. Secondly, too, in terms of the legal framework, I think last time I checked, it's the NLCD 252, which created the Cooperative Society Act. It's still there, but what I think we should do is we might present a reform bill to Parliament to pass, and we can put in the clause of where maybe there's a workers' union or a cooperative already established and it's trying to go out of business. The workers can take full control. That's putting an angle to the workers' cooperative. But there's an existing guideline, legal framework, which I think we would need more education on in terms of opening it up and redrafting it the way we want. Because the existing framework even makes it difficult to register new business. The registrars are now laid back. If it's not a credit union, if it is not an agri marketing, as you rightly said, they wouldn't even want to register you. They're not being innovative anymore on how they can help businesses. So even if we should submit this whole idea of workers' credit union, they wouldn't even want to do it. So our role, and I'm glad Madam said that there are avenues for people to support and then the advocacy drafting. We would have to look at redrafting the law as it is, because the NLCD 252 is now limited. It is a good law, but it's still limited, and it doesn't take into consideration a lot that we can do as a. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. So unless there is anybody who wants to speak from online, I'm going to suggest that we bring this to a close. Let me just add, that what Amina said, that join us. It is through us operating, coming together, and thinking about these things. This idea of the act, absolutely, we have been talking about it. We're trying different ways and doing it, but we need people to to come and help us push everything. So join us, whether it's in Ghana or online. Join us. If you are in wherever you are, or in another African country, try and mobilize people there to also join, because the idea of creating a financial facility is going to be country-based. Yeah, so we want to create financial facilities in country to help to support people, whilst we can provide the training and so on at a continental level, at a global level. So people should join, and it is by people joining us, getting traction that way, that we can move this thing forward. Lots of people have lots of ideas that they have come today. They haven't come from people who are all members of CA, so there's plenty of room for you to come. Okay, I don't see anything, so I'm going to, before ending, as you know, one of the other two partners for this was Lower Tide, which is where we're located, and also DTA. Now I'm going to be mischievous. After you've joined us, please make a donation to Lower Tide. No. No, but yeah. So support Lower Tide. They are running this really, really important space here, promoting African writing and African writers. And knowledge is foundational. Yeah, and we consume too much. We consume too much from the rest of the world in terms of our clothing, our this and our that, and our knowledge systems. So please, really support them as you can. Are you sending a link? How are you doing it, Seth? No, but we can put something out. Yeah. Okay. So those of you who registered, we know where you are, how to get hold of you. If you haven't, there's a piece of paper going around that asks for your name and phone number and email, and we'll write to you. So we'll encourage you to support the organizations that have made this happen today. So with that, I would like to thank you very much for coming, either physically here to Lower Tide or online, and say that, join us, and we have a long road to travel. We've only just started, but we can see that there's a lot that we can do, yes, waiting for us to do, that we need to put our mind to. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to everybody who helped to make this day happen. And hopefully we'll see you again in the not too distant future. Thank you.
I think you're going offline now, but yeah, thank you very much again. I also want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy. I know Saturdays are quite busy for Ghanaians, but you make time to actually come in. So thank you very much. I must say that on the 29th, there's going to be another screening here. There's a screening and a workshop by our artist.